Welcome and welcome to June. Welcome to Garden in Place for the month of June. I'm Roger Gray. I'm a Master Gardener Volunteer with the University of California Agricultural Natural Resources Cooperative Extension here in Los Angeles County. We have a whole bunch of Los Angeles County Master Gardeners on with us this morning who will try to help you out with some of your gardening questions and concerns, as well as provide some information for you. We have three major presentations up this morning. We are going to hear from Daniela Roveda, who is going to talk to us about some basic ways to diagnose what's wrong with my plant, that being one of the most common questions we get. We're going to hear from Marty Lindsay, who'll talk to us about the basics of drip irrigation. And we're going to hear from Jeff Warner to talk about those bad boy plants, the invasives that some of us unwittingly are planting in our garden and that don't do our local ecosystem any good. Before we go there, though, I want to mention that this is June. It's a time, the first of the month is a good time to reevaluate the garden space and what's going on. And June is a weird month. It's this month where we're transitioning from the cooler part of early summer in May into midsummer. The midsummer solstice is just 3 weeks out, and that's when the days start getting shorter again. And so we have a lot of considerations right now. We have considerations of the temperature, we have considerations of the length of the light that is out there, the amount of daylight available for things, and we also have considerations of moisture. And for most of us, that means there's no rain, and if we're growing veggies, we're going to have to irrigate. So that's one of the reasons we can't wait to hear from Marty, to hear about how to deal with the fact we're in the no rain season almost everywhere in LA County. The interesting thing about June is no matter where you are, you're different. When you look up what to do, when you go onto the Master Gardener webpage, even for LA County, they'll give you a general checklist of things that you should be concerned about at this time of the year. And it turns out it really varies from region to region within the county. So the three pieces that I use for this kind of an analysis, and we're going to look at with our other Master Gardeners, are that a lot of stuff is finishing. Your spring stuff is starting to finish up. Some of your spring plantings are old and have achieved their goal of reproducing and doing the things they need to do. Some of them are just not going to tolerate even the warmth of June weather well, and so they're just done. Or you've eaten them, you've cut them off and harvested them, and it's time to get your next planting out. Right now, in a lot of areas, there's stuff you can still get away with that technically isn't summer plant. We're going to talk about some of those, the lettuces and the like. In a lot of places, like in Pasadena, June is often quite temperate. We often get a lot of June gloom, a lot of overcast. So the temperature doesn't get high enough to cause the lettuce to bolt quickly. Whereas other places, maybe the lettuce isn't going to hang around for more than a week or two because it's going to try to go to seed right away because of the heat. And then the last segment of it is that this is a space where there are some things. This is kind of your last chance to get in a crop from seed to put in for the fall and the summer and the fall. You can plant tomato starts now. They'll still keep going. But as we get into fall and the daylight starts to wane, they may not produce as much. If you're going to grow corn, sweet corn, if you have planted it now, you'll probably still get sweet corn by the end of the summer. But after this, if you plant it much later than right about now, it's going to have some problems down the road, and it may not fully mature, and it'll be kind of frustrating for you. So let me bring in some of the Master Gardeners. Let's talk about things that are finishing first. I've got snow peas that I planted back at the start of the workshop series, and I've been picking those snow peas off like mad for the last few days. I think it's going to go a little while longer, but it's going to get ready to get old and pass on. I'm keeping the peas picked so it'll keep reproducing. Master Gardeners, what do you think about this moment in your region? Are you still getting your cool weather crops going?
Hello. Well, I would say where I live, where it's hotter, I live up in the valley near Burbank Airport. I didn't get in a lot of cool weather crops because my raised bed needed to be rebuilt, and that happened by mid-March. But to backpedal on something that Roger had said about putting in tomatoes, you can still put in some, but keeping in mind that it's going to get cooler. The days are going to get shorter, and they may not produce well. You may want to put in cherry tomatoes now if you're still going to put in tomatoes. But what I've been noticing is since the stuff I put in mid-March, of course, seemed to not be growing, but of course it was putting in, establishing its root system. What's going on now is this overall with my tomatoes and squash and everything I've put in, now all of a sudden there is all of this abundant growth above ground. And what I'm going to having to keep up with is making sure that things that need support get the support they need, and everything has the room it needs. So now it's a lot of catch up with me, is running after the garden in a way and making sure it doesn't overgrow itself to the point where it doesn't produce well. So that's what I'm trying to do in my garden at this point.
Awesome. Now, Daniela, I know you're out in the coastal zone out there. Still kind of cool out there in June, isn't it?
It sure is. And I'm out in Santa Monica. The weather is very different. We are still in the very low 70s during the day, and the heat comes maybe late in the afternoon. So I still have time to plant some veggies from seed. For example, squashes, pumpkins, and winter squashes that actually mature late in the fall. We can still plant from seed because we have a good block of 6 hours of almost no sun every day for the entire month of June. Sometimes it goes into mid-July. I would not plant tomatoes from seeds anymore because it's way too late. The plant won't have enough time to grow to reach maturity and produce fruit because first, there is not much heat now, and the season is getting shorter. I still have some winter veggies going. My kale looks beautiful, and even if it's early June, and it will keep producing for at least the entire month of June and July, so I'm gonna keep it in. My lettuce is doing really well. I keep it a little bit in the shade, not in full sun, but it's going well. So overall, it's still planting season for Santa Monica. So I encourage anybody who lives near the coast to put in new plants. We still have time.
Very cool. Yeah, as usual, the folks out at the beach are all chill. Now I know Marty, you're way out in the other end of the county and nowhere near the ocean, and it probably is already starting to get a little warmer out there, isn't it? And there you go.
So I have more temperature extremes. Still getting really sweet lettuce and sweet peas, but probably starting next week, I'm going to have to pull out all of my my cool weather crops and just focus on the melons, the peppers, the tomatoes, the beans, the squash, the true summer crops.
Cool. Yeah, that your audio wasn't great, but I got that it's time for you in your area, way out in near the grapevine, to pull out the winter crops to make sure that you're using all the things that enjoy the heat and benefit from all the extra heat and the extra sunlight. So that's all cool. All right. And that just proves that there are some places where you can get away with certain things. For example, Daniela is still growing lettuces out by the coast because it's still relatively cool and they respond to temperature more than length of day. And it might not be a good idea to get any tomatoes in out there. I don't think you would have too much luck at the coast right this minute with melons because there's just not enough heat, not enough sun right off at this minute. But Marty has got the cantaloupe patch ready to go, I can tell. All right. There are a few things so those are things you can get away with. There are a few things I mentioned, like corn is definitely, this is your big last chance. If you're going to put pumpkins in or something like that, a melon, this is your last chance. And if you start with starts, you're already 5 or 6 weeks ahead of the game, depending on how old those starts are. So as we're able to get out to the hardware stores, the big box stores, the nurseries, it's maybe okay to plant some things that aren't from seeds or aren't from seeds that you found accidentally in your cupboard. Awesome. All right, I'm going to keep that concept open on the floor. Master Gardeners, if you think of something you want to add as we go along about that, that is related to the month of June, feel free. You can just chime in on the question session. We will be taking questions from the audience in the chat if you have not seen that, and there will be links there also. So first up, we want to hear this morning from Master Gardener Daniela Roveda to talk to us about some of the things you can use to diagnose your own plants. And we will take questions, but I want to give you a little heads up. Problem diagnosis is a huge topic, and there would probably enough to go on this topic for days. So we may not get to every single personal question that is on there. All right, Daniela, take it away.
All right, so my title is very, very ambitious. What's wrong with my plant? Millions of things can go wrong with our plants. I would like to keep it to the things that have easy remedies. And sometimes once we figure that out, 50%, if not more, of plant problems can be resolved. So, there are three things that can go wrong with plants. One we call environmental factors. So environmental factors can be water mismanagement. Plants can be watered too much or too little. It could be temperature. It could be too hot or too cold. It could be light exposure, not enough sun. It could be a problem with your soil. Your soil may be too acidic or too salty. It could also be a problem with nutrients in your soil. All of these can prevent your plants from growing healthy. The other one is diseases. Diseases usually are caused by fungi, bacteria, or viruses. Those are a little harder to detect, and most times, unless you want to use some strong fungicides, they're harder to treat. Finally, third big factor that can prevent your plant from growing healthy is pests. I'm not going to talk about pests today because pests are usually pretty visible, so you can detect pests more easily. They leave traces, they leave holes in the leaves if you have caterpillars or slugs or snails or any other critter that chews on your leaves or twigs. So I'm going to start with the environmental factors. Okay, so what are the ways your plants is going to tell you that there's something wrong? The first one is yellow leaves. We call that chlorosis. The second one is burnt leaves. Sometimes an entire twig can burn, or sometimes just the edges can burn. These are two examples of chlorosis, yellow leaves. On the left side, you'll see that the entire leaf becomes pale yellow. The other side, you see that just that the veins stay green and the rest of the leaf turns yellow. Those are signs that there are two different types of problems in the leaves. Either way, when a leaf becomes yellow, it's a problem because that shows that the plant is not producing chlorophyll. And chlorophyll is the pigment that captures sunlight in the process of photosynthesis, which is the way a plant produces its own food, carbohydrates. So if you have insufficient chlorophyll, your plant is not producing food for itself and it's not growing. So that's a problem. Yellow leaves are a problem. The causes of yellowing of leaves are usually either environmental, all the factors I mentioned before, water, light, soil issues, or diseases. The number one environmental factor that causes problems is irrigation mismanagement. And that means you're watering too much or too little. Unfortunately, your plant cannot tell you exactly what it is. And often, if you look at that picture on the left with the droopy leaves, that can mean both too much or too little water. Now, it's easy to figure it out. You just put your finger inside that pot, and if it's completely dry, it's telling you you need to put more water. If it's completely wet and damp, it means that you have been watering too much. My fellow MG Marty later will talk to you about ways to manage your water better using drip irrigation systems. So these are both excess watering, underwatering are problems that can be easily remedied by changing the amount of water you give your plants. Number 2 environmental factor is nutrient deficiencies. Now, because we live in Southern California, the most common nutrient deficiency is nitrogen. And nitrogen is the most important nutrient for green growth in plants. And our soil is generally deficient. So if you have a nitrogen deficiency, you have to supplement your soil with fertilizer, nitrogen fertilizer. It could be a chemical fertilizer, which is the one that comes in different forms and you buy in at your Home Depot or any other nursery. Or if you want to grow your plants organically, fish emulsion and blood meal are both excellent sources of nitrogen. Another deficiency is what we call in micronutrients. There are other elements that contribute to the growth, but they're not as fundamental as nitrogen. And those are iron, zinc, and manganese. Those will give you usually that pattern with the green veins in the leaves and the rest yellow. If you have that problem, you have to add either compost and or manure or other chemical powders that will contain all of these micronutrients. Well, usually the question I'm asked is, how can I tell if it's a nitrogen deficiency or an iron deficiency? Those are the most common ones. Well, if you think that iron is a heavy metal, whereas nitrogen is very volatile. So if you see yellow leaves, new leaves, and green old leaves, so the yellow leaves are usually, the new leaves are at the tip of branches. If they turn yellow first, it means that it's an iron deficiency because iron is heavy and it travels slowly along a branch. So the first leaves that turn yellow are the newest ones at the tip. On the other hand, if you have nice green new leaves and yellow old leaves, that's usually a sign of nitrogen deficiency. And I need Roger to help me here because my PowerPoint is stuck.
Okay, if you click on the screen, it should go forward. There you go.
There we go. Thank you.
It's a thing that happens to me all the time.
Oh, okay. The number 3 environmental factor is insufficient light. So I think a lot of us forget that heat and temperature and sunlight are 2 different things for a plant standpoint. So you can have very hot temperature, but if your plant is in the shade, your plant will not grow well. So a plant needs at least 6 hours of direct sunlight. If it doesn't have that, it will have stunted growth. So another remedy, easy remedy here is to move your plant to a sunny location And if you don't have a sunny location, you have to give up that type of plant and find another that can adapt to a more shady location. Now, there is another sign of plant stress, and that's burnt leaves. The causes can be environmental. Usually, they're either they are in the environment, or they are caused by our mistakes. Let's see. The typical cause of burn leaves is excess heat. This happens sometimes in very hot summers, when we have temperatures over 110, 120. Let's say just a street tree, you can see that some of the branches are burnt. And there's really not much we can do, unfortunately, if you have heat. The only thing you can do to protect your plant, if you know that you're going to have a very hot day, is to give an extra watering to your plant and hope that it will be able to withstand a temperature spike. All right, so another cause of burn leaves is soil salinity. Sometimes your soil is too salty, and again, not your fault, but if that's the problem, the only way is to just drown your soil with water and flush the extra salt away. That should take care of it. Next slide. This is final problem you probably have caused yourself, and that is excess fertilizer. Sometimes we see our plants suffering and we think, oh, I'm gonna give it an extra dose of nitrogen so it will grow faster. That's wrong. So unless you should follow the instructions on the box of your fertilizer. If you put too much fertilizer, you can actually kill your plant. You are going to, it's toxic to the plants. So sometimes if you make a mistake and you put too much fertilizer, again, the only remedy is heavy watering. Try to flush the extra fertilizer you put fast, and your plant should come back to life. Next slide. After having exhausted all the environmental factors, if you are pretty sure that you're watering well, you have enough sunlight, you have enough nitrogen, micronutrients, no salinity, and so on, then you really have to think that your plant, if it's not doing well, has a disease. And that could be either most likely a fungal or bacterial disease. This is a topic for next time. But we master gardeners usually say that most times problems with plants can be fixed pretty easily by following proper care for our gardens. And I am done with my presentation.
Sorry about that. Now I'm back. Thank you, Daniela. There have been a number of questions going by, mostly very specific things about what people might want to do for certain problems. And somebody has noted they need to cover their plant with shade cloth sometimes in the afternoons because of their location in the San Gabriel Valley. Certain parts of the summer, the sunlight gets too harsh, and that's definitely a thing. But there's a couple of questions about mildew. How to undo mildew, and we might want to maybe just take a moment and look at that, particularly for leaf crops like kale in this case, or I forgot what the other one was, but it was another leaf crop.
Yeah.
And
well, mildew is a fungal disease. It's a fungus. There are products, there are chemical products that you can spray, but if you want to keep your garden organic, honestly, there's not much you can do. You can spray hard your leaves with water. Sometimes that helps. What you should actually do is select varieties that are resistant to mildew, and there are some in usually every type of veggie we plant. You have to be really careful with cleaning up the area where your plant is so you don't transmit the disease. Another way is you should do some crop rotation so you don't plant the same plant in the same spot as last year's infected plant. But most likely, especially in squash that is very prone to powdery mildew, it not necessarily affect fruit production. So sometimes you just have to live with it. Fungal diseases cannot be solved very easily, unfortunately.
Yeah, I agree with that. The interesting thing is for a pumpkin or a melon, you're not going to eat the leaves. And so you don't care as much as long as the plant's still able to function and produce the fruit you want. But with your kale, where you're going to eat the leaves, that's a whole different thing. There are some organic schedule pieces out there that sound much more chemical than they are, that are fungicides that may be effective on mildew, but for the most part, prevention is your biggest thing. And there are preventative fungicides on the organic schedule that you can use, but that's a workshop in and of itself because it's a very tough problem.
But I would add one thing. I noticed that mildew, especially in kale, happens towards the end of the season, not at the beginning. So the proper season is also a remedy of a sort. So plants at the end of their life cycle tend to be weaker and more prone to diseases and to attacks from pests. So planting in the right season is a solution too.
And that's an interesting observation. It might be time for the succession planting to come up in a different location so you're not there with all the spores. Awesome. We do have a couple more really general questions, but I want to move on. And if we have time at the end, we can come back and try to pick some of those up because they're neat questions. Failing that, come find us on the Master Gardener Facebook page. Our next presentation is going to be Marty Lindsay talking about those drip irrigation units. And I know she's told me that she's having some problems with her internet connection today. So we will do the best we can. I am going to first show a video that she has prepared and then bring up a very brief slide presentation. And then we'll see if we can hear her well enough for the slide presentation. All right, so if everybody makes sure they're muted out while the video plays, that will help the audio get through as well. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Marty Lindsay, a Los Angeles County Master Gardener, and I'm coming to you from Northwest Los Angeles County. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about installing a simple drip or sprayer irrigation system. The first thing that you want to do is you want to start with one of these. It's a filter and water restrictor, and it makes the water pressure decrease so that it works better in your raised bed. You also want to put one of these things in, and what this does is it allows you to continue to have a hose while also allowing you to do the drip for your raised bed. The second thing you want to do is have some of this tubing that you can buy at any home improvement or drip place. It comes in a whole bunch of different lengths. This happens to be a huge amount that you will not need. So what we did is we have this tubing coming out, and this thing here is called a splitter. And we're going to add drip irrigation to this area over here, and then this has a sprayer. So you're going to follow this over to here. We have another one of these splitters here. The splitter comes up into the raised bed. And then how this gets installed is you're going to take one of these punch out things. Is this called a punch out thing?
Sure.
Okay.
It's gonna hit you right in the face.
Oh, and the side that it wants it. And then you're going to take this and you're going to pop it in. It's probably easier to do if it's not running, but it kind of shows what it's doing. So now I've popped this in, and I have the sprayer. And we can have as many sprayers in here as we need. Larry, how many feet does that say that does?
10 or 15.
So this says it goes 10 or 15 feet. It's obviously not going that much, so I would cut it in half. And you can add or subtract these as you need to. The only other thing I probably want to talk about is this little thing. It's called an 8 coupler, right? And what you need to do with this 8 coupler is when you're at the end of your drip, you fold this in half and put the 8 coupler on so that your water isn't just running everywhere. That's pretty much it. So there's a simple way to install a drip system that doesn't cost a lot of money and saves you a lot of water. Adios.
Hello. So, am I on the speaker view yet? Yes, I am. No, I'm not. Okay, I'm talking. I don't know if I am being heard or not because I am not on the speaker. Can you go to the next slide? Can you go to the next slide? I'm going to talk. Hopefully you can hear me. This is truly a garden in place. I know that not everybody lives in a ranch and has a bunch of stuff lying around like we do, but this is truly stuff that was lying around our property, and we decided to go ahead and add a drip system and a sprayer system in our raised bed. The raised beds for our place are year-round. The water needs in something like that in a year-round location change dramatically, and so I'm not going to talk about putting a timer on because you really need to know how much water you need before you add a timer. So these are the things that you're going to need. The tools, you're going to need some cutters and a punch. And then here's a list of things that I'm actually going to go over one by one. So can I have the next slide? Next slide. Okay, so the next slide, just the tools that you need. This is the tool that you're going to need to cut your tubing. This is the 1/2-inch tubing that is what connects from the hose bib to the bed, and this cuts it the best. This is the 1/4-inch punch that I use to punch the thing out. Next slide. Next slide. Okay. Well, let's see. What is my next slide? Okay. So, super duper important. You want to be able to have a hose because you don't want the only water going into your raised bed to be the drip irrigation. You want to be able to have a hose. So this is super duper important. And you can turn the water off and on by these little things. This is the filter. This part comes off, and then this is the actual filter. You may or may not need this if you're on city water. We absolutely need it because we're on a well and we need an additional filter so that we can protect our equipment. But you absolutely need these two things. One of these is a pressure reducer, and the other one of them is an adapter so that you can adapt the hose bib size, which is a little bit bigger, to the irrigation size, which is a 1/2 inch. So that will go on this. And then your tubing goes into here. All right. Next slide. Next slide, please.
Marty, the slides are changed. I think they're just slow to come through to you.
Okay, sorry. Okay, so you see on the right-hand side is the setup of what it looks like when you have a hose bib with the filter and the pressure reducer and the adapter on it, and then the hose is on the other side. And then on the left-hand side, you can see that that is our water system. That is a pump house, and that is our water tank, and that is why it's super important for us to have the filter on it. But like I said, what's most important for you guys is the restrictor and the the reducer and the adapter. Okay, the next slide. Okay, so we already talked about this is the 1/2 inch. This is the 1/4 inch tube with the sprayer. If you buy these from like a big box store, it's already going to come on here. We actually have a bunch of this 1/4 inch tubing lying around because we have we have vertebrate pests that chew it up, so we need to change these out occasionally. Okay, the next slide. This is what makes everything work together. This is the T adapter. And as you can see, there's several pictures of this T adapter. There's one that was at the beginning of the run where we had half of it going to do the drip and then the other half going into the boxes. And what you're hearing here is the run that's going up here is going into the box, and then the run that's going out this side is going to the next box. Okay, so next slide. Okay, I do not have this in here with me, but what this is this is actual drip. And I'll talk a little bit about why I would use drip versus sprayers. Drip is amazing if you know where the plant is and where it's going to stay. So a tree is a perfect example of a drip. The first picture is what it kind of looks like coiled up. The second picture is a close-up, and then the third picture is the drip that's around one of our walnuts. Next slide. Okay, the sprayers. These put out, they say they put out 10 to 15 feet, but I think they really put out closer to 6 feet. So if your bed is 6 feet across, you probably a couple of them down the center, and you really kind of need to play with it because, like I said in the video, there's no way that this is going 15 feet. And these heads are adjustable. Here's the little thing that punches into the tubing. And what I did not talk about, and I don't have an example of, is if you decide to take these out, there's little plugs that you can put in that will just make it so that it doesn't squirt out anymore. Okay, next slide. Okay, this little guy. So the next slide are these little 8, and this is what actually makes everything work, because you see, you get to the end of the run in the box, and if you just left it alone, it would just be like a hose that would be continuously running. So this little 8 coupler, you literally just fold that in half, and then you put that on, and there we go. Sorry, technical difficulties. You see how this now is cramped off and it's not going to run all over the place. Let's see what's new. So now the next slide, it just kind of shows you, what it's like when it's watering in the garden. You can see that in the video, but it's kind of hard to see the. You can kind of see tubing on the one on the far left, and then the one in the middle, you see kind of where it punched in, and then there it is in the garden. And one of the things I'll just mention that has really nothing to do with irrigation and everything to do with growing is always plant something that's flowering so that you're attracting pollinators into your garden, because you will see that your yield of whatever it is you're growing is going to only increase if you have pollinators visiting your garden. So plant flowers too. Okay. And then the last slide, just to kind of sum everything up, is that I know that irrigation seems to be super, super intimidating and everyone thinks that it's really hard. It's not really hard. It's just, you just have to just get in and try to do it. There are kits that are available from the different home centers and online, but I will tell you that they never have this part. These parts and these parts are exact. These are what make it work. This is the thing that allows you to connect it to your hose and puts the pressure down so that you can connect it to the irrigation system. This is called a pressure reducer, and this is called an adapter. So if you buy a kit, you're going to have to buy these things anyway. I find that if you're buying the stuff at a home store, it's going to be a lot less expensive than buying a kit. We've bought a kit before, and it has a whole bunch of pieces that you don't need. So you can buy them at a home store. You can buy them online. We use a place called Drip Depot, and there's another place called Sprinkler Warehouse. So if you're not, comfortable going out, and looking at things in public, you can order them online. It's super easy. I like the DIY. It gives you the ability to only use what you want to use for extra pieces. The option of adding a timer. Once you figure out how much water your garden needs, you can add a timer, but until then, you really don't want to. And this is your best tool. If it's dry from here to here, it's okay. If it's dry from here down, it needs water. Like literally, this is your best tool to determine when your plants need water. The other rule of thumb to remember is that the bigger the container, the less amount of time, or the less amount of water it needs. The smaller the container, the more often and the more water it needs, because it tends to dry out faster. I think I talked about this. I like the spare when you're planting from seeds and you don't know what's going to be growing where, but I like the drip when you know where you're going to plant something that's going to stay. When you're going to do a tomato transplant, I do drip with a tomato. But if you're going to plant a whole bunch of lettuce from seed, there really is no way to know where it's going to come up exactly, especially I do a lot of gardening with children, and they're very erratic waters, and the seeds never end up where you put them. So I tend to like sprayers for that reason. I know that I covered a lot of information in a very short amount of time, but I will tell you that it is super easy, and if you have questions, I'm happy to answer them.
All right. Thank you, Marty. Real quick, the video and the PowerPoints and all that will also be available on the Facebook group. So if you wanted to go back and see any of that, and that's all available. There was one question I think I want to throw out for Marty, and then we're probably going to go ahead and move on to our third presentation. Somebody asked about soaker hoses. Are they similar, different, efficient? Are they effective? What do you think about that?
A soaker hose actually, it's a hybrid, because you don't have to have any of this stuff. The soaker hoser is the same. It's the same diameter as your garden hose. And you can use it, but I find that the soaker hoses are not very pliable or malleable. So I think they're kind of hard to figure out with them. I haven't had luck with them, but that doesn't mean that they're not a good option.
Cool. Well, conceptually, they're similar. They're low, they're putting the flow out low to the ground, so it's not spraying out in the atmosphere and evaporating. You're getting the water right where the plants need it, as opposed to all over the place.
I may add a little comment to Marty. I also find that they wear out very quickly. They tear. So under the sunlight, our sunlight, they don't last very long. Whereas the drip tubing lasts forever, or almost.
Yeah, well, it's sort of like potatoes. Once you have drip tubing, you never run out.
Yeah, what Daniela said is absolutely true. I don't know if you saw in my garden, but you saw these black pieces of hose that are about that big. Those are old soaker hoses that I just throw around so that the birds think it's a snake. I mean, like, that's literally what I use them for.
All right. Yeah, I'm sure the manufacturers will be unhappy to hear that, but there you go. There are a whole bunch of other really great questions. It's important to follow up on, so make sure you find the link. And Master Gardeners, if one of you could put the link in for the Facebook group, that would be great, because we can get those specific questions. Coming up next, right there, Jeff Warner, who has unmuted himself and drawn focus, because he's going to tell us all about the plants you don't want to plant, the plants we love to hate, those invasives.
Okay, let me see if that's going to work. Okay, that does work.
Excellent.
Okay, so invasives versus weeds. Invasives are things that are affecting the natural ecosystems, but they're particular to where you are. So an invasive in one area may be fine somewhere else. So it has to do with any plant that's non-native to its ecosystem, but that particular ecosystem. And it also has to cause some kind of harm, either environmentally, economically, or to human health. There's a group called the California Invasive Plant Council, which is keeping track of invasive plants. They're a group of scientists that look at all these different criteria to decide which plants they think are invasive in California. And the current list is about 312 plants. So invasive plants, what makes them successful, just like with weeds, they're successful because they can, they have some combination of these attributes, not necessarily everything here. They produce either a large number of seeds, they thrive on disturbed soil, they establish quickly, seeds are distributed either by us or birds or wind, and then natural control agents are absent. So since these are non-native plants, they often get here without other things that might be feeding on them and keeping their populations lower, but they're missing here, and so they kind of run amok. Some of these plants also put out chemicals that prevent other plants from growing around them. And then they can even hybridize with similar species, but because they're different, the hybrids may not provide the habitat that native species need. So they can, so obviously wildlife habitat can be affected. Then that just affects the other things that depend on those plants. Diversity can be affected. You often see these monocultures, huge groves of one type of invasive plant that just completely filled an area. Water quality, soil erosion. Some of these plants, like ice plant, which people brought here to provide erosion control, actually don't have deep roots. And so when they get up in the wild and they're on a hillside in the wild, like at the beaches, they don't hold the soil, and so when it rains heavily, the soil gets moved. And a lot of these also die back and become a fire risk. Like you see here, this is I don't have the right screen here, but this is a field of some kind of a weed that's dried out completely, and now it's flammable. So I'm going to focus on 5 different species that were of interest to me. One is black mustard. We see a lot of this during the spring. It becomes part of our super blooms. It's not a native plant, but it loves those wet winters and takes off in the spring. And I see these on where I'm in Diamond Bar, the freeway cuts where they have steep hillsides. These things they'll just completely cover the hillside. It looks gorgeous, but they don't belong there. And they die back and they become flammable as everything else. And they produce chemicals that prevent other things from germinating. There's also a lot of things you might have in your own garden. Like I have fennel. I've marked them with asterisks, the ones I'm currently growing in my yard. I have quite a bit of fennel. I have this edible chrysanthemum and Jerusalem artichoke. So there are a number of vegetables we might grow. They're legitimately good vegetables, but they can become invasive. This is, to me, the symbol of Los Angeles. When I had left the state for a few years, anytime I come back, this would always make me homesick, seeing tall Mexican fan palms lining the streets. And but it turns out these can be invasive in our wildland areas too, because the birds are carrying the seeds. And you end up with these large stands in riparian areas oops, something moved in the wrong place. But anyway, and then because there's no one landscaping, there's no landscapers removing the dead leaves like they do on the street trees, those dead leaf collars are actually quite flammable. And there's a few other ones I listed there. Surprisingly, edible figs and olives. I'm not growing olives, but I'm growing figs. But those have proved to also be a problem in certain areas. Now this is a classic one, highway ice plant. You know, so many, you know, California hillside landscapes are covered in some type of ice plant. They're not all invasive, but there are quite a few species that have been a problem, particularly in coastal areas. As you can see here, these beach areas are just covered in this stuff, and it's beautiful because it flowers through a long season, but it doesn't provide the right habitat. And one of the interesting things it does is it actually enriches the soil, which as a vegetable gardener, you think, oh, that's awesome. But for native plants, this is not awesome because they evolved to grow in fairly nutrient deficient soils. And when you enrich it, you're giving competitive advantage to invasives who like that richer soil. And of course, there's lots of other things. English ivy, people are familiar with that one. But also some other, like lantana. Lantana has been promoted a lot recently because it's a really good, pretty, long flowering, drought tolerant plant, but it can be invasive as well. Castor bean is always interesting to me because this is a notorious poison. The beans contain ricin, which had been used on shows like Breaking Bad to set up some murder scenes. But it is quite poisonous. Only a few seeds, if you chew them up, can kill you. But it's a beautiful plant. It often has magenta leaves. But you don't want to grow in your yard. You certainly don't want kids around it. It even has some contact problems with dermatitis. And other weeds, there's lots of other invasive weeds. I have lots of bird clover in my lawn, which makes these vicious burrs once the seed pods form. Poison hemlock, another poisonous one, and other yards you probably have another weeds you probably have in your yard as well. And this one's causing a lot of problems, principally up in the Sacramento Valley, where it just completely clogs the waterways up there. And they've spent millions of dollars over the last couple of decades trying to remove this stuff. But it's so vigorous. It's considered one of the fastest growing plants in the world. With a plant, unbelievably, can cover 6,500 square feet of open water. And it propagates very easily. Just little pieces of it will bud provides mosquito habitat, blocks the sun, depletes the water of algae and plankton, which native fish feed on. And so it's a real nightmare for waterways. And there's quite a few other things. And most of these are introduced by us putting them in our ponds or aquariums, and then either dumping unwanted materials out into natural areas, or water carries it down from rains. And so we have a lot of areas where we have a number of invasive water plants. So as I mentioned, not all weeds are invasive, and most of the weeds you have in your yard may not be invasives. I have all of these in my yard except for the bindweed, which is like morning glory, one of the most difficult ones to get rid of. But some of these were brought here deliberately, like dandelions were brought here by European settlers because they ate them and then just sort of escaped into everywhere. If anybody doesn't have dandelions, I'd like to hear about it. Purslane is an interesting one because it's an edible weed. It's used in Mexican cooking, mixing, stir-fried into eggs and things. But you want to make sure you know what you're picking and eating, because another low-growing rosette is the spotted spurge to the left of it, and that one is toxic. So you don't want to mix those up in your recipe. So one group that's formed to help work with this problem is called Plant Right. Master gardeners each year help Plant Right by conducting a survey of nurseries where we go out and look for invasive plants that are on their list. And they have a very short list. It's 7 plants currently that are being sold in nurseries that are also invasive. And they pick plants that they think we can actually have an impact. So these are plants that are not so widespread that taking them out of nurseries is going to have an effect. So anyway, they got canceled this year. It's the first year I signed up for it. Roger helps with LA Master Gardeners. He's our interface for this. But unfortunately, it got canceled until we can go back out and visit these nurseries. And so the nice thing they do is they list these 7 plants, and then they give you options that are very similar looking plants that are non-invasive. And as you can see in the upper right-hand legend there, a plant that's invasive in one area may not be invasive everywhere. But unfortunately, all the plants that are on this list currently are invasive in the South Coast area. That includes us. So here's the other 4. Here's the highway ice plant that's been on the list forever. Vinca major, periwinkle, that's one that's still sold in nurseries, and If you look at old Master Gardener documents, it might even be a recommended plant, but now it's not, so please avoid that one. So pampas grass is one of the ones on their list. This is just showing you how this gets out in the wild. That Newport Bay picture, that's the Back Bay area where I used to go bicycling there quite a while, and quite a lot. And they try to keep that, you know, native as much as possible, but it's a lot of work to try to clean up invasive plants out of native areas. And then these are the some of the alternatives they suggested for pampas grass. And these are all nice looking. They're different, but they're, you know, they're sufficiently similar. They're all clumping grasses. And these particular group are all native California grasses, so a double whammy there if you plant those. PlantRight has also been pretty successful. They've been able to take 15 plants off the list because nurseries no longer carry them, or very few nurseries carry them. So Scotch broom is an example of one that was on the list. It was highly invasive, but now you can buy something called sweet broom, which is a hybrid, but it's sterile. And so it looks very similar, but it's not going to cause a problem. So for more information, there's quite a few good resources here in California. I mentioned the California Invasive Plants Council that has that huge list. They've got pictures and information about every one of those plants, so a very helpful site to go to. They also have another part of their site that focuses on different regions, and so they have a Southern California list of invasive plants and a number of things you can look at for that. I highly recommend that one. There's PlantRight's information. And of course, UC always has great IPM notes on things, and they do have a page on invasive plants that I found a really great place to start this research.
One of the interesting things to keep track of, though, is the term invasive has a very specific scientific meaning. It means that for whatever reason, it thrives in the natural environment, spreads itself around, and causes some kind of harm in the sense of outcompetes the local plants and does not provide the habitat for creatures, or it provides an economic problem for agriculture or other elements. Just because it's really aggressive in your garden and tries to take over your garden doesn't necessarily mean it's invasive. There are a lot of native plants that are technically not invasive because they belong there, that can just take over your yard nonetheless. But you know, it's a local.
I was just going to say, one of the distinctions is that invasive plants don't require us to reproduce and spread, whereas weeds largely do need something from us, either turning the soil or providing supplemental irrigation or something like that.
Right, and in the sense that a weed is just a plant that we don't want there. It may well be a perfectly lovely plant, or it may be something that we don't have a use for. It just gets in the way. Awesome. All right, well, we are going to wrap up. We're just a little bit over because of some of our technical difficulties. I promise the video will be shorter because we'll cut some of those out. And the videos will be the live and full version so that you'll be able to see the thing without any of the artifacts from Zoom. All right. Well, last call, Master Gardeners. Otherwise, it's that time. Remember, we're not back next week. We'll be up June 16th, in 2 weeks' time on the 3rd Tuesday of the month. Thank you, everybody. Master Gardeners, if you stick around for 5 so we can debrief.